Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if I would be able to live up to such an introduction, but anyway. So before starting off, you see the title here, and I would like to make a round of questionnaire. Who from the audience is familiar with a problem or is suffering the problem right now? So that you don't have tagging, but you get the mandate to do some chargeback allocation, and you don't have idea how to do so because tagging it's not in place. Just to give a brief idea about. Okay. I'm just saying so because that's the main motivation behind that talk. So that's the situation that we were in, and when we developed the system that I'm going to go through, we realized that we are not unique. So we all think that we are unique, but we are not, and that's the main reason behind. Okay, said that, let's go ahead. So that's the title. You can see my name there, and you can see as well Daniel and Julien. They are part of the FinOps team. They couldn't make it for this trip, but of course they were part of the entire system, and they need to be mentioned. So let's start. So yeah, that's the company I work for. It's called Aviv Group. I think that in the today keynote from Rick from Amazon, he mentioned that. So it's a real estate marketplace company based in Germany, but we do operate in different countries in Europe, especially Germany, France, and Belgium. We used to have Israel as well, but that was sold recently. It's public information. And as a real estate marketplace, it's basically about posting properties, selling them, renting them, buying them. Okay? It's high traffic, millions of users, and of course, each one of those transactions, it has a kind of high value in money. So yeah, so that would be the company. You have the different commercial brands there, and some numbers, which I don't think if they are updated or not, but kind of. Okay. So let's start. Yeah, sorry for that. Anyone knows who is that? Oh, come on. No, really? No? Okay, anyway, that's okay. There is a fantasy game called, Warhammer 40,000. It's everything, it's war and such, and these guys are kind of the most, superior soldiers of the mankind. They are called, Space Marines. So this presentation is going to kind of articulate the Space Marine journey if it was the team. Sorry, I thought that it was more geek audience here, but that's okay. That's okay. That was maybe my expectation. Okay? So for the Emperor, let's go. So the presentation is going to be like the background of the system, and then we are going to come to the real system. So I will try to attach to the time, which, by the way, is at 0. Joe, time is at 0. That's okay. Speak too much. Okay? And I would like actually to let the audience to ask a lot of questions, okay? But we are coming from somewhere. So what was the landscape at the beginning? And just to put that in perspective, that was kind of 3 years back, okay? So the company, as I was saying, is composed of different markets and different platforms. So by that time, the strategy of the company was to consolidate every local platform and services to a consolidated one. And we named that white label. The reason for that is quite simplistic. So you don't care about how many business units you have. You may have 3, or you have 30. You plug and play in the white label service, and that's it. But of course, that means kind of a hard transformation from a lot of local platforms to a centralized one. But anyway, at that point in time, that was the strategy. So in terms of chargeback, which was the challenge? Well, all the business units accounts, of course, they were consolidated in a single account, from the payer, and some form of chargebacks were required. And that's important to understand, some form of chargeback. But the requirements, they were not as much from the finance standpoint. Okay? The status was that we kind of had 50 accounts, from legacy. Okay? The new white label accounts, they were starting off. I will get back to that because, if you give the engineering teams the capacity to ask, to create things without any permission, things are getting out of hand quite rapidly. We are going to get to that, okay? And it was not tagging a standard, neither an implementation. So as you can see, things, they were kind of primitive, okay? And that was what we actually got. So we needed some kind of chargeback, okay? What was done at that time? So in that time, okay, it was very simplistic. We just got a couple of personas involved. It was an engineering team, and it was finance. I don't know if I mentioned that, but otherwise I would. It was kind of some heroes in the sense that the company needed that, but no one knew how to do so. So it was some guy from finance asking for a bare minimum thing, and some kind of hero from engineering team trying to figure out what to do. Okay? So in the time, Amazon cost categories was choose to do that job. Since we are speaking about Amazon, I don't really know how much familiar you are with cost categories, but I assure that 3 years back, the capabilities, they were not as they are right now. Not at all, okay? With the cost categories, manual grouping, it was as well creating, some account level default values. So they would actually take an account and say, that account, belongs to the business unit, and I'm going to put some account level value for that account, and I'm going to place to whatever cost center or business belongs to. But that was not actually programmatically ensured. It was rather manual, and we are going to come back to that. So that what was done in that time, okay? Well, of course, you can imagine, such a static, system, it does require fully manual intervention all time. News accounts, comes in, comes out. You don't have anything which is, programmatically ensured, so you need to do that. Share accounts, allocation was actually not doable because they would be assigned to one country or one, cost center either, but not two of them, okay? Of course, the third one, it's related to the other ones, and I would say even more important things, it was the lack of ownership. I just mentioned that it was a bunch of heroes, actually a handful of bunch of heroes, maybe 2 or 3, that they did implement that system, but that was not their scope, neither their job. So as you can imagine, the lack of ownership meant a problem. And I'm not saying lack of ownership in terms of accounts, I'm saying lack of ownership in terms of who the heck is managing chargeback, who the heck is taking care of it, okay? So of course the desired changes, if you see the challenges, it was that, well, automation needs to be some sort of requirement, okay? The share spend allocation needs to be possible because otherwise you have a share spend account, you don't know what to do, okay? We need a deeper involved from a engineering persona, and I would add as well finance persona there. And we need a dedicated team. I'm just making a spoiler for the next slides to come, which is the FinOps team. So that was more or less, back in the days, 3 years back, the situation go on. Maybe some of you are there, okay, I kid you not, you will be, in the point that I was just a few months back, that you need to do something, because that's good enough, but not ad eternum. So now we are getting back to this guy, as you can see, is crawling. There is a war going on, he's unarmed, he's under fire, he doesn't know what to do. That was it, okay? So things evolve, and we went to a kind of an acceleration stage of the so-called white label platform. As you can see, the strategy in that time was lift and shift. So they would take legacy services and accounts and lift and shift them to the white label platform. So in that regard, you need to consider that business was prioritizing, as I can see there, acceleration over a lot of things. And that's important to understand, because one of the things that I just asked myself and the team during that time was, how can it be that we have been as long time with such a, let's say, bad system without getting any attention touch? And the reason was that the business was okay with it, okay? So as long as we were running and doing the transformation, business was okay, which is one of the mantras that you will always hear. We as a FinOps is like, yeah, we can do magic, but business always wins, and we work for them, not the other way around, okay? So the challenge was to have a maintainable system that delivers some kind of timely and good enough allocation, good enough being the key point, okay? By that time, and that was probably like 2 years back, so 1 year passed by from the crawling stage, we had more than 300 accounts. So remember, we got from 50. In a year, we just did like times 6, if I calculate well, yes? So times 6, the number of accounts. That's impressive. So once again, the very moment you allow everyone to be speedy and rapid and such, well, that might be good for some things. It might be not that good for others. Tagging standard was developed. That was a good thing, but it was not enforced. And that's part of the strategy. So the business decided very consciously that we would not enforce things as an approvals for an account, or as a tagging standards, compliance, because we want these guys producing and accelerating. We're going to come to that, but remember, you can either go fast with a car or go safe. But there is no such thing as go fast and safe at the same time. Okay? That's what everyone wants, but it do not work like that. Okay? Anyway, by that time, we already did something to improve things. So as you can see here, which kind of personas were involved in which kind of system we developed. The things that changed, so by that time, you will see that the FinOps practitioner, FinOps team was there. By that time, it was just me, alone. Hey, and I got this a very nice challenge to do something about. And of course, I did already involve finance and engineering. They were there. I already, involved leadership and product. So as you can see, the scope of the personas involved did expand. That was good. And we did a couple of iterations in relationship with the previous system. So the first allocation was to just create some cost explorer filters that will allocate the volume of chargeback depending on the business unit. Now, looking back in the past, I would say it was quite naive to do, because at the end of the day, it's kind of reinventing the cost categories system that was in the past. It was a very good intent, not that good results. Okay? That didn't last as much, because the main challenge was that still a manual filter, you need to, to update almost daily with the new accounts, coming and going, or the new coming and the deleted ones going. So then we actually found a second iteration. I don't know how much familiar you are from Amazon Organization and OUs, Organizational Units. But let's, for the people who's not familiar, let's put it in a very simplistic way. It's some sort of kind of containing, some business logic, and say, this amount of accounts, they belong to that business unit or that department or that project. So luckily for us, we had some, organization units, a structure that kind of matched, what it was, either white label platform or specific business units. And then we thought, well, fantastic, because when you create an account needs to live in an OU. There is no other way. So the enforcement is done. That's how it works. So instead of making, cost explorer filters, I can look at the content of a specific OU and match that one with a specific business unit. Well, fantastic. So it worked. Now, so the shared account, and they were some, okay, what actually we did, and it's saying, very important, is, once again, good enough for finance. So the accounts that they were marked as platform or white label, we applied some sort of percentage that was agreed with finance, okay? If you want, I can give more details about that. Let's keep it there, okay? Now, so the same as before, in that stage, what was the failures and what we learned? Well, as I told you, cost explorer filters, kind of reinventing the wheel, shame on me. We knew that, but we did not at the time, okay? I wouldn't say impossibility of share accounts spend allocation. I think that I would be more gentle with myself, and I would say that that was lack of accuracy, but the share spend actually was treated, but not probably to the right standards. But then we got something. And the third one, actually, it's sad, because tagging standard was there, but remember, business said, do not force people to adhere or be compliant with anything, to just, make people running as fast as they can. So we got the tagging, but it was a lack of enforcement and adherence. So basically, it was useless. Sorry for that, but that's how it was. Okay, so what we learned? Well, using organizational units was good enough, I would say. Was not the final solution, but was good enough. The same with the rationale applied with finance. Maybe I can tell you, maybe that's a good time to say that. So the rationale was kind of evil. So what we calculate is how much the legacy accounts that they were being able to be allocated per business unit, they meant in percentage of a spend total, and then we'll say that the spend total is the one that you're going to pay for the white label. It's a bit evil, because if you think about it, it's like the less legacy you have, so more white label you embrace, the less you pay for it, when it should be the other way around. But in that way, we were encouraging people to get away from legacy. So once again, in terms of cost allocation, don't be mad at me. It doesn't make any sense. But in terms of business, they were super pleased because we were pushing people to the things that they wanted to do. Okay? Another thing that we learned is that, yes, the standard of tagging was kind of owned by FinOps, but its implementation, it was supposed to be kind of engineering, but it wasn't clear. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we went through all these, sometimes even tense meetings with our colleagues from engineering, because we had a clear idea about, okay, you need to enforce that, and there are ways to do so, SCPs, cloud custodians, scripts, whatever. You can do that in 1,000 different ways. But the implementation was on them. And they just said, well, we are not told to do that. Okay? So that was kind of unfortunate. So that was the second stage. And we got something. Okay? Yeah, I remember, no nerds here, but anyway. So the guy, is still up, is getting ready for doing something. It's not as bad as it used to be. It's not yet fighting, still looking around, but, is doing the things. And now it comes, the system. So now are when the things are changing, and that's like 1 year back. So that's the juice of the presentation. So before it was the context, now it's exactly what you came for, okay? So the strategy changed 180 degrees, and well, they said, we go back to local. Yeah, we can make fun of it, but the companies, they do that all the time. They actually bet for a strategy, they try to do the best, and if they cannot get it, they take a seat, they rethink, go back to the drawing board, they may change the decision. So 1 year back, the leadership realized that strategy wasn't working for different reasons, and they decided, you know what, we're getting back. So this white label thing, it could be reused in different ways and terms, but we are going to get back to actually local reuse platforms with a thin layer of white label with the shared services. But of course, the challenge that comes with that is like, okay, cool. We have been doing A, now we are going to do B, which actually we did before A. That's no question. But now the accuracy, take another relevance. So the previous 2 stages, it was good enough to have some rationale. It was good enough to make things in a way that it was reasonably or understandably good, although we knew that it was not that accurate, but that was good enough still. Well, now that changed. And trust me, it changed in a couple of months. So a system that was living for almost 3 years, it was challenged in a very short time of period. To make things even better then, well, accounts are piling up to more than 700. That's a significant amount of accounts. I kid you not. Still, the tagging standard was there, but yet still not enforced or developed or actually adopted. So that's exactly what some of you raised the hand before. So business comes and say, you know what, we need to do that. And then you look at that and say, okay, so you tell me how we are going to do it. Okay. So I know that's kind of shameful, I guess, but you all know what is that, don't you? You all know what is that. So that's basically the things that we are facing. Yeah, please don't take screenshots of that. I will get fired. Okay, but as you can see, that's a pretty common situation that a lot of us will face. Okay, so that was kind of the situation we had at that time. Okay, so now, okay, so what we have to do by that time, as you can see, we kind of had the very same personas as before, but there is something that I would like actually, I think that it's maybe in another deck, in another slide later on, but I think in here is important to notice as well that within each persona that is mentioned here, we have different sub-personas, because when you go to engineering, it's not the same operations as development, foundational platform teams. When you go to finance, okay, it's not the same P&L that accounting. It's not the same treasury, the taxes. So we have a lot of different subset of personas. So although the number of personas are okay there, it was actually more than that, okay? By the way, the FinOps team by that time was already 3 people. It was me and Daniel and Julien, so thanks God, because otherwise I don't know how I would do it. Okay. So the system, what we did, is kind of simplistic. We're going to get to the details of it. So, but the important point here is to highlight the fact that the implementation of the system, it was the easy part. So the hard part was to think from the more of a product mindset and understand what our internal customers, being finance, leadership, and different things, what they would like to get, and then translating that in a specific use case that we can conform to a set of requirements to be implemented, which seems very like kind of bureaucratic and waterfall cascading thing, but trust me, that was like 80% of the time we invest. The rest was the implementation itself. When it comes to the implementation, it was a very clear boundary between what the FinOps team would do and what the engineering teams would do, as you can see here. So we actually would design the requirements of the system according to business needs, and then engineering will make sure those requirements are being met. It's a very different situation if you compare with the past. Of course, when the system is in place, okay, it's allowing you to perform chargeback, and that's, of course, on the FinOps team. So you can see the set of responsibilities, it was quite well defined. And now, so believe it or not, that is a copy-paste of the document that we did generate internally, okay, which is the set of requirements. We just came across 3 different requirements. And I will go through the 3 of them, okay? I don't know how technical you are, but probably everyone is familiar with kind of coding, GitHub, and these kind of things. I guess so. Otherwise, you just tell me, or in the Q&A we can go through, okay? So the requirement number 1 was, okay, I think that there's probably any other organization out there, and a cloud service provider account has some kind of metadata in some place. In our case, we're using GitHub, and we have a GitHub repo that has a YAML file that it has, I don't know, the date of the account creation, who asked for that creation, the team that it belongs to, and different things, okay? So the requirement number 1, as you can see here, it was just to add a couple of lines according to the ISO 2 country code. So we're trying to be as much standard as we can, which is like saying chargeback country. That's it, very simplistic. The reason behind that is just as simple as if we would ask engineering to just yet commit more code to another repo that belongs to FinOps, they will probably not do it. But they were already familiar with this YAML file from the past. So what we did is taking profit of that inertia, let's put that way, and just asking them to add a few more lines, okay? So as you can see, if it's just, the account is just fully, its allocation is fully to one country, it's just to put chargeback country and the country, code, which in that case is this 3, but it's a standard, so you can have actually 3, you have 25. I don't care, okay? And you can see the second, the second part of that requirement is like, well, if an account maps, to several business units, the country value, instead of on a specific thing, is put as share, okay? And it's a spend allocation, it's defined by the field allocation. As you can see, using fixed proportional. Allocations values are defined to 2 decimal place. In case where equals across 3 business units, precision can be used to ensure that it's 1. So that's, to make it simpler, it's just to make sure that no problems will come from the technical implementation. So if someone is creating an account and they are saying that's a share account, but they are saying it's 0.7 with 70% and 0.4, well, that's more than 1, it's not going to fly. So the implementation is going to tell you that's not right. Or actually, if it's less than 1, it's not right. The sum, it needs to be 1, okay? Yes, and the final line, I know maybe it's because I have engineering background. It seems silly, but actually it's not. Take a look. Both country and allocation field values must be enforced to ensure programmatic consistency. Because otherwise you will end up with this cost center thing that we just saw before, like cost center with capitals, non-capitals, and such. So that was the first requirement. As you can see, we are talking the worst case scenario to add 5 YAML files which are very, very minimal, very easy to understand, okay? The other two requirements, okay, the requirement number 2, you will see the value of that, is that when the YAML file country is there, its value will be replicated at account level tag automatically, with the very same value. Now you're going to come to that, but the very moment that you have an account and you are marking that account as, that's for that country, the implementation the requirement is saying to the implementation that that needs to replicate at account level tag. I don't know how much you're familiar with account level tags, okay, but that's something which is not reachable as, it's via, Amazon organization. It's not like the resource account tags, it's different, okay? And the requirement number 3, and that's critical, the FinOps team must be an approver of all those PRs, so all this code, that create or modify this specific YAML file, lines, sorry, not files, lines. So whenever a team is changing those values or are creating an account or whatever the situation is, when it comes to those specific YAML files, that's not flying if some of the members of the FinOps team is not saying, okay. What's the reason for that? It's to control people, micromanage people. Well, we just don't care about that. But the fact is that if you have an environment of more than 700 accounts, you tell me, but my brain is just not coping with it. The only way that we had to ensure that's happening is just enforcing. So as you can see here, we're taking a lot of leverage from already existing systems, and that will be one of the lessons learned. So those, as you can see, it sounds kind of simplistic, isn't it? It's like 3 requirements. It's like, really, Jordi, you spend like weeks doing that? It's like, well, yes, we did. I tell you, we did. Back and forth, okay? So the workflow is kind of simplistic. So when that system, let's say, when you have all these 700 accounts with its meta files in GitHub, with these YAML files included, okay, you have the information. I know, how all these 700 accounts, they will be allocated. It's a span. Fantastic, but you know what? I'm receiving a bunch of invoices at the end of the month, and accounting team, accounts payable, are asking me, okay, how that works. So that would be, the workflow. So what we did is, there is a, CI/CD pipeline. I think it's in Circle CI, whatever the provider you use, guys, that goes to that repository. It reads that information from all these YAML files, okay, and it creates just a CSV. Now we're going to have a look at the CSV. That basically will tell you that account, the percentage of that spent account goes to that specific business unit. And it's doing that for all accounts, okay? It creates the CSV file. That CSV file, it goes to an S3 bucket that we have in one of our accounts as a FinOps team. And from there, we are making, some Athena queries. That's becoming a bit more techy, but anyway, let's go. So it's kind of a small, but I think they're still visible. So as you can see, the CSV file would be like account name. There is an account ID, I think, but we just, take that off because of security purposes, okay? Then there is the chargeback contact, because, that's another thing that we added. Then is the valid from, the country, and the weight. So as you can see, let's take the first one. As you can see, Awesome Eagle, fantastic name. So you can see that it has 3 lines, and it has 33% periodic per business unit. So when you have the CSV file, that specific account, let's say it's $1,000, so it's 333, it will be per each one of the business unit. So that's the CSV file. But of course, that's not telling you the spend itself. So the real allocation, let's say, bread, it comes here in the sense that when you have that CSV file, it's like, okay, you know what, but I spent that amount of money this month, how I'm actually charged back in this one. So it's composed of 4 different queries in Athena, okay? So we have a baseline spend allocation that will take the core file. I guess that everyone knows what the core file is. It's basically this massive file, from Amazon that tells you exactly line by line where the spend is. So it takes that file, it makes a join query with the CSV file, and basically then it tells you, who you need to charge back per all those accounts. It's as simple as magic, okay? Probably some of you already saw the last part of it. Is like we take the payer account out. And there isn't specific reasons for that, actually. So with the first query, you would have all the spend for that particular month to be allocated to the business units, okay, but not the payer account. So the reason is the payer account, guys, remember, it does contain marketplace, it does contain recurring reservation fees, it does contain savings plan, recurring fee, or even the upfront payments. So you cannot actually put the payer account then. So the payer account has a special treatment, and that will come with the different queries. So as you can see, we have a specific query that it calculates, the allocation per reservation, arise. Remember, savings plan and arise are not the same. They are different things. And when you go by the core file, you have different logic to query them. So the second query would just take the reservation usage. So you are able to see exactly who used as much of reservations, whatever they are. OpenSearch, RDS, whatever. The third query, it would be doing the same by savings plan usage, which is yet another instrument, okay? And the fourth query basically will be the two previous queries, total payer account spend minus the previous two queries. It's going to give you a total. So that's going to be the payer account, its own spend. And in that case, we decide that we actually divide by 3 and we kind of charge back evenly. In that case, the own assets from the payer account, they are not that significant, okay? So the final allocation is just, the sum up of these 4 queries, and that's how we fix it. I know that maybe I run too much, so it's going to be Q&As, but that will allow us to do that. And here you go. That's beautiful, isn't it? Take a look. So before someone comes to you and say, who is using what? And you say, no. As you can see here, well, now we do know. That's Cost Explorer. Remember what I told you that from the YAML files, we would actually put, the cost allocation tags? Actually, that's using cost allocation tags at the account level. Has nothing to do, with actually the YAML file in a sense. So we are not querying the YAML file for that. That's Cost Explorer, okay? And as you can see, you will get the problem that within the shared ones, you don't know what to do. But that's another question. But as you can see, it's adding a lot of visibility there. Yes, please. I know, it's a bit kind of a military. It's not that, fashion, but sorry. We're still being kids within, okay? So anyway, lessons learned, it's just half an hour, so hopefully you're going to have like 10, 15 minutes of Q&A, which I think I would take profit of that. So lessons learned. If I would get back in time, and when I joined this organization 3 years back, and they told me, yeah, you know what, we have some sort of a standard in tagging, but it's engineering. I would say, well, you know what, give that to me or I'm not working for you. Sorry, I know it sounds harsh to say, but over time you learn from your mistakes and there are some negotiables and tag needs to be enforced. That's it, period. I guess that they are organizations that they are composed of highly accountable people and all of them, they just spin off a VM and they put the right tagging. But trust me, that's not the common thing, okay? So that would be the first one. Then the second one, okay, it's very related to the fact that I mentioned that we work with an already existing repo, with an already existing meta YAML file, with an already existing procedure and way to work. So instead of reinventing the wheel, for us was very, very important to reduce the cognitive load, and increase the adoption success. Okay? Instead of reinventing the wheel and move ahead, basically. What I'm trying to say is that this YAML file logic, it could be implemented in our own repo. Simple as that. And then we ask people to just have the regular repo when they're creating the Amazon account, and then ask them to do yet another repo. And you know what? That's going to lead to more poor adoption. So that's what we take profit and we kind of tweak the already existing things. So the lesson learned was that either you like it or not, there are some ways of working that they establish, the people is used to a few things, and you should take leverage of it, okay? The right, the left, that lower corner, take that with a grain of salt in the sense that, of course, technology, it's important and everything, but But trust me, it's everything about relationships. It's everything about relationships. You need to have a good relationship with engineering because they need to put things as you actually find fit. You need to have a good relationship with finance to understand what they need. And even sometimes to let them know what they are asking is not possible and when they can get. So we actually found that that was critical for our success. There is another reason I didn't mention in the past, in the previous slides, but when I did the start, I don't know you guys for how long you have been working in your companies, but people will take me as a fool in a good sense because I would approach engineering and I will tell them about finance and taxes and allocation and P&L, and they will look at me like, what this guy is talking about? He knows nothing. Then time passed by, you save you save them for different, kind of funny situations, and you stop the bleeding, and you fix cost anomalies, and then, the career capital, the trust starts to be there. So when you are getting back to them and you call for a meeting, they actually accept the meeting and listen to you, okay? So that system that I just went through, I don't think that was possible 3 years back, even if the company wanted to, because no one knew what the FinOps guys they were doing, what it's about. Now, actually, it's quite different. So that's critical. It's about, fostering relationship. And, of course, you probably noticed that already. What we develop is in reality not a chargeback system. Yeah, okay, it is. Okay, you have all these YAML files things and funny things, and at the end of the day, you run through a few Athena queries that they are a bit complex. I can share that with them with you. But at the end, it's an allocation system. It's not just chargeback, so it is an allocation system, a bit primitive, I take it, okay, but better than nothing, and it could be used for more things. So, in that regard, that system that we just put in place, it just unblock more, I wouldn't say unblock completely, but it promote better budget, better focus, and cloud unit economics. So remember, we're coming from an era that the company was saying, it's just one platform, we don't care, and just suddenly, the country managers are being held accountable to say how much they're going to spend in cloud. Well, without that system, they don't know, because you don't know how much every business unit is using. So that system in reality, although it's used for chargeback, it's in reality a cost allocation system. Said that, the system, of course, is not perfect. It has a lot of not round shapes that they need to be rounded and different things, and that's okay. So we have different things to do that. So I just mentioned 3, probably they are more than that, but that's what we came across with. So easier data digestion. We are actually kind of working in building a visually appealing report, because right now we have the outcome of this Athena queries, just a number, and finance people love Excel sheets, so for them it's just okay. We put that in an Excel sheet for the chargeback. They take that data, they are happy. But that's just not enough for us. So we are working, in putting those visuals in a kind of more digestible consumption form. Okay. Then of course we just talk about Amazon, but remember that the FinOps, and I think that today's year said, FinOps scope is constantly evolving. Now we have all this tokenomics thing and such. But remember that just the previous iteration of the framework, it was about cloud plus a scope. So it's not cloud anymore, it's SaaS, it's data center. I think that someone is even saying that it may be headcounts. Oh, fantastic. Now we're being part of the layoff structure, whatever. Okay, so in that regard, we need to add SaaS and using Focus. So that's next step, okay? So it could be done with this John query about the CSV and the core file. It could be done as well with the Focus data set. And then, of course, FinOps as a code, which is, once again, tagging, and I think that's one of the big inconsistencies, I guess, that this talk, because in reality, if we would have tagging per asset, would we need that system in place? Probably not. Probably not. So probably the next iteration is maybe if tagging is in place, we don't need that system anymore, or not, at least in its present form. And with that said, it's 36 minutes, so thank you so much.
I unfortunately did start his timer late, so we do have 5 minutes for Q&A. But quick note, holding the magic box does not make you loud. Talking into the magic box makes you loud. So please ask your question into the magic box.
Hi. So I saw that you put the allocation percentage into the tagging as well.
Yep.
So how do you make sure as the accounts evolve that the percentage keep the same, or how do you make changes on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's kind of part of the design principles. So what we actually found is that it was almost impossible to keep up with 700 accounts. So what we actually said is like, guys, you're going to be responsible to set up these thresholds. If things are changing, you better change it. So there is room for mistake, of course. The good thing is that remember that that's within GitHub. So if there is an account that it was 50-50 and now is 80-20 and has been not updated for 2 or 3 months, I tell you that sooner or later will be caught by someone. Then we can get back and, well, we don't have any problem. Then we go to that engineering VP and say, yeah, your guys are not doing that. I know it sounds harsh, but the fact is that as long as we do not foster accountability, it won't happen by accident. So there is no enforcement of that. We do trust fully to the engineering teams that they are familiar with those accounts, so they know better than us by far which kind of thresholds they should apply. And if those thresholds are changing, if those accounts' ownership, it may eventually change, well, we do expect them updating them. Yep.
I have a question. So you did say you had like 700 plus accounts.
Yeah.
So how long did it take for all of these accounts to kind of get on board with the YAML? There were just few lines, but they are already in AWS and workloads are running.
Yeah.
How would you enforce even those 5 lines to come in?
That's a brilliant question.
Thank you.
So I skipped that part, but that was by the FinOps team.
Okay, so
Yeah, because we already knew, not the most of the accounts, but a lot of them, and we knew that if we would ask all the teams for the 700 accounts to be updated, would take actually probably a long time because they are working on projects and priorities and deliveries. So actually what we did is that we did the first backfilling of the information. It was done by Daniel, myself, and Julianne. It took about a couple of weeks, and then we had, let's say, 100 of accounts, maybe 80, that we didn't know about, and then we had to contact guys and actually do so. But the first iteration, the initial one, was done by us mainly. So.
sounds good. Thank you.
All right, folks. Unfortunately, we do not have time for more questions right now. However, Jordi is one of my favorite human beings, and he loves to talk. So he will be very happy to chat with you individually one-on-one. Thank you again. Everyone give him a round of
Thank you so much.
applause.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thanks for watching. Check out the rest of our channel for more FinOps content. Like, subscribe, and leave questions and comments for our speakers. We appreciate your support.